it's time for the distance and midpoint formulas. Now, the funny part about these formulas is when you look at the actual formula, it looks like a lot to try to memorize. But if you think about how it works, it's really not that bad. Okay, so you can stay focused here and get this down. It's going to be much easier than you think. First things first with the distance formula. If it's on a number line, it's pretty straightforward. All it says is the distance is the absolute value of the difference. So for example, let's say P is at -3 and Q is at 8. No matter which way I subtract these two guys, 8 minus -3 or -3 minus 8, I got to take the absolute value of them because I can't have a negative distance. So that's 11. This would be -11, and the absolute value of -11 is 11. Okay, so it gets the same thing. So no matter which way you subtract, a distance has to be positive. It can never be negative. Okay? First off with the distance formula, basically finding the distance between any 2 points. So I'm going to find the distance of this line, and this is going to give me my distance formula. So my first point is x1, y1. Just saying it's my first point, xy. x2, y2 is my second point. Well, this is derived from the Pythagorean theorem. So let me draw on a right triangle here. If I think about it, our sides on our Pythagorean theorem triangle are a, b, and c. And a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? That's our Pythagorean theorem. Let me write that down. C squared was a squared plus b squared. Right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to put the c squared first. Well, let's say I just wanted to find c. I want to find the distance. Okay, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to replace this with d. D is going to stand for distance. Okay. And I just want to know what the distance is. So to get the c by itself in my equation, to find the distance, I would take the square root, right, to cancel that square. So it's really c, but now I'm going to use d instead for distance. D equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. And I can't square root each of those because of that plus sign. If they were being multiplied, I could. Well, let's think about this now. What could I put in place for a? How do I find a? Well, it's the distance between my x values, right? x2 minus x1. So that's really my a squared, right? So I got d equals the square root of, well, a squared is x2 minus x1, and I'm squaring it, plus, well, my b, if I look, is the distance between my y's. So y squared minus, or y2 minus y1 squared. And there we go. So I could solve for the distance of any line by using this formula. The square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. See, I told you, it looks like a lot, doesn't it? It looks like a lot. If I think about it though, really, I just take the distance between my x's, I square it. I take the distance between my y's, I square it. I add the two, and then we take the square root of it. And then we take the square root of it. Okay, so let's rewrite this again here. Erase. So to find the distance, we take the square root of, subtract my x's, x2 minus x1, square it, and then we add that to subtracting my y's, and then square it. Let's take a look at an example. So find the distance between these 2 points. Well, let's write our distance formula again down here. The square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And let's plug in our values. So whichever, this could be my first point, this could be my second point. So x2, which is 3 minus -4. I'm going to write this one out all the way so we can see. Squared, and then we're going to add that to y2, which is -1, minus 1. And we square that as well. So let's simplify this. 3 minus -4 is really 3 plus 4, which is 7. And -1 minus 1 is -2. So d equals the square root of, well, 7 squared is 49. And -2 squared is 4. So I got 49 plus 4, which is 53. 53. And it doesn't ask to be specific on whether you want a decimal or simplified radical form. So if I want to simplify this as a radical, I just look for perfect square factors of 53, which there aren't any, and there's no units, so the distance is the square root of 53. Or I could type this into a calculator and round it, in which I would get approximately 7.3. So either one's fine. Either one's fine if I'm not being specific. I'd do with a square root just to get used to simplifying radicals, but it's up to you. So just plug it into our distance formula. I'm going to show you my shortcut way. Okay, this is how I do the distance formula. I'll write the distance formula here just so we can see it. Right, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, so to find the distance, this is how I think about it. I take the square root. Well, I subtract my x's. So the difference between my x's. Well, how far are 4 and negative 3 apart? They're 7 apart, aren't they? So 7 squared. Well, then I look, y squared minus, or y2 minus y1 is the distance between my y's. How far are 3 and negative 7 apart? Well, they're 10 apart, right? So I take 10 squared. And what do I do with these two things? I add them. There's my shortcut instead of having to write all that out. Just think about how far apart your x's are and how far apart your y's are, the difference between the two, right? And I can simplify. 49 plus 100, d equals the square root of 149. And I can see if there's perfect squares of that. But in this case, I do not believe there are. So what we do is we either leave it like that, or I can say it's approximately 12.2. Either way, I'm okay with either answer. Square root of 49 or 12.2 would be the distance between those 2 points. Midpoint formula, you're going to feel much better about this. This goes a lot quicker. Midpoint, think average. Think average. Okay? So if I'm given 2 points, it's basically just the average of the 2 points. Well, how do you find the average of something? You add them up, then divide by how many there are. So if I look at this, to find this midpoint right here, I'm going to write it nice and big. Okay? I take the average of my x's right away. So x2 plus x1, x sub 2 plus x sub 1, and I divide by 2 because there's 2 of them, right? Add them up, divide by 2. Then I find the average of my y's. Add them up, y2 plus y1, and divide by 2 because there's 2 points. Add them up, divide by 2. Find the average of them. And there you go. That's how you find the midpoint. So add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's, divide by 2. Pretty straightforward. So let's just look at a couple examples. I can do this nice and quick. So find the coordinates of the midpoint. Well, it's the average of the x's. So negative 4 plus 8 divided by 2, and the average of the y's. Negative 1 plus negative 3 over 2, which gives us what? 4 over 2 and negative 4 over 2. And we should simplify, so 2, negative 2. Done. Pretty straightforward, right? Find the average of your x's, 6 plus 3, divide by 2, and the average of your y's, 8 plus 4, divide by 2. If I get a fraction, let's just leave it as 9 over 2. You can write 4.5 or 4.5, but 9 over 2 is just fine. And 12 over 2. So we got 9 over 2 and 6 for our point. There you go. So midpoint, much better. All right, well, what if we're given the midpoint and we're trying to find one of the endpoints? In this example, find the coordinates of D if E is at negative 6, 4, and that is the midpoint of DF, and F has the coordinates negative 5, 3. Let's just look at it here for a sec. So E is my midpoint now, and that's at negative 6, 4. And then we have F being one of the endpoints at negative 5, negative 3. So that was F. E is the midpoint. And D, I'm guessing, is somewhere above E and to the left a little bit, right? Because going to here and it's going to keep extending. So there's an algebraic way to solve this using our midpoint formula. gets kind of complex. I think it's just a waste of time, essentially. Because if I think about this, if it's the midpoint, it's going to be the exact same distance away in the opposite direction. So for example, if I'm looking at E is the midpoint, right, at negative 6, 4, and I have one of the endpoints, which is F, that's at negative 5, negative 3. Well, from F to E, it's going to be the exact same distance, just in the opposite direction to E to D, right, the other endpoint. Okay? So if I think about that, it should make finding my X and Y values pretty easy. Because going from F to E, you're basically adding on a negative 1. So shouldn't that be the same thing? Just going another negative 1 in that direction. Same thing with your Y's. Here, we're going 7, plus 7. So going from the Y value of E to the Y value of D, it should go another 7. So 4 plus 7 gives us 11. And let's graph that just to check. Negative 7, 11, which would be D. Does that look like it makes sense? E would be the midpoint. Looks good to me. Okay, it saves you a lot of time rather than going through all that algebra for it. All right, just think through it. Right? The endpoints are the exact same distance away from the midpoint. Lastly, we could throw in some algebra for you here. So for example, it says find the measure of PR. Oh, this should be if M is the midpoint of PR. Well, if I think about it, M is the midpoint, so I know that PM and MR are the same thing. So I can set this up two ways. I could either say 6 minus 3x plus 6 minus 3x equals 14x plus 2, or I could have wrote what? 2 times 6 minus 3x, because I have two of them, add them together. Either way, I don't care. You can set them up either way. I'll just deal with this left one here and simplify it. Well, 6 and 6 gives me 12. Negative 3x and a negative 3x gives me a negative 6x. Combining them, got to simplify that left side. All right, now we got a variable on both sides. So let's get it to one side, which means I want to add my, so I have a negative 6x. I'm going to add 6x to get rid of it on the left side, which means I have to do it to the other side. And that's gone, so we're left with 12 equals 20x plus 2. Okay, now I'll get a variable by itself. So the inverse of adding 2 is subtracting by 2. So I have 10 equals 20x. And inverse of multiplying by 20 is dividing by 20. So x equals 10 over 20, or simplify that into x equals 1/2. All right, am I done? Hold up, remember what did we say the other day? Always look back and see what they're asking for. It says find the measure of PR. Well, what is PR? PR is 14x plus 2. So now I got to plug in 1/2 for x. So 14 times x, which is 1/2, plus 2. Well, half of 14 is 7, and 7 plus 2 is 9. Any units? No units? Done. Okay, so just setting up your algebra, setting up an equation, and going through and solving. There you go. Kind of a quick review on our distance and midpoint formulas.